and for your flexibility. A few of us had made plans to go away. We didn't have an interim superintendent search on our calendar, so we're doing this Zoom, and we really appreciate it. Because of that, and I was having some internet issues, Michelle Ayer, who's the vice chair, is going to kind of run the meeting in the room too. So Michelle, if you want to.
Yes, sorry, I just came back in. I had to let Harbor Media know we were ready to go because I forgot to bang the gavel, Carrie. I'm out of practice. So Dr. Nash, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. We have many folks here in the room, and as I mentioned in the hallway, but I'll just explain for everyone in the audience or listening at home, we have about an hour. We have 13 questions to ask you. Each person on the school committee and the screening committee will ask a question or two. And yesterday we actually, the first day we went around and introduced ourselves ahead of time, but then yesterday we did it sort of as each question came up. So I think that sort of worked, sort of put the question in perspective for you as well.
That's a great idea.
Okay, perfect. All right. So I will start. I have the first question. So, Dr. Nash, could you tell us about your personal, educational, and professional background that led you to apply for this position in Hingham in particular?
Boy, that's a loaded question. First, thank you. Let me thank the committee for inviting me. I know I've been in your shoes before. I was a longtime school committee member in Old Rochester, so I certainly see things from both sides, and have been an educator for a very long time. Let me start back when I ended my career. I ended my career as a superintendent of schools in Hanover, and I think one of the crowning glories, well, there were two things. One was to open the new high school and to build a new high school that had not met, in two tries before, had not met its, was not able to pass. So that was certainly a crowning glory for a building that was pretty old, to say the least. And secondly was to settle the teacher contract before I left. That was critical. When I retired, I think I realized after a short period of time that I probably retired a little too soon. And about 6 months into my retirement, I received a call from a chair of a school committee in a neighboring school district, actually very close to where I live in Rochester, in Laketown, in Lakeville. And they asked if I would be interested in coming in as serving as an interim. I really hadn't given much thought to being an interim. I was just beginning to get used to what retirement was like, 6 or so months after working 40 plus years in education nonstop. And I thought, well, it's good to work close by near the communities that you feel very strongly about. And so I decided to do it. They were really at a point where they had an interim superintendent who was leaving. Their superintendent had left prior to, and so I had an opportunity to go in there, and that really started the ball rolling. And then I took a hiatus, as my resume shows, and went back into, I call it re-retirement, went back into retirement again. And 3 years after that, I got a call to ask if I was interested in going to this place called Oxford, Mass. I had no clue where it was. Got on the highway. I'm someone who doesn't mind driving and think well in the morning, and off I went. And there I ended for a year, and ended up staying the next year because the district next to us, we shared the same legal counsel, and the district next to Oxford, the legal counsel had said, I think they are going to need you next door. And I said, no, this 75-mile one-way drive is getting to me. But lo and behold, there I ended up. So why did so Central Mass beckoned me for 3 years in a row, and this past February, I was, not this February, but last February, I was in Florida, and I received a phone call saying the superintendent who they hired, they're going to let go, and they're going to need you. So I said, well, gosh, I don't know. Finishing the year, maybe? Well, maybe. And that was 2 weeks before the pandemic broke. So I signed my contract on March 9th. I signed the contract on March 9th, and I thought, oh, okay, I had a nice 2 weeks vacation in Florida. This will be okay. I can finish the year. I can do this drive, no problem. And 16 months later, here I am. So one of the reasons that intrigued me was I'm a South Shore girl. I grew up in the South Shore, grew up in Whitman, educated at Whitman-Hanson. I was a basketball player, played Hingham years ago when I was on the basketball team. So I can remember, all of that. And I thought it would be something for me anyway, very similar to Hanover in some sense. It's my home. As much as you travel to places, and after doing 3 years in Central Mass, I developed great relationships with my school committee members and my administrators and all of the people there. There's nothing like home. So to me, I'm home again. And I still have a lot of energy, and as my husband said, I don't think you're going to be sitting around long. Plus, the one final personal note, and I know this is very long-winded. I promise I won't be. My husband, is retiring also, and I thought, oh gosh, I don't know, after 50-plus years of marriage, if the two of us together are going to really, so I'm thinking, okay, but anyway, so that's a long story. So Hingham to me is coming home in many ways and going back to where I started. So, yeah. Sorry for the long-winded answer. Trying to.
I don't think it was long-winded at all. I share your sentiments because my husband's cutting back to 15.
Okay, so you know.
I'm ready to do it. All right, so my name is Mary Eastwood. I'm the principal of South Elementary School, and we share a lot in the over 40 years kind of thing. So we both love it, that's for sure. So I would love to know what your experience is in the trenches. I see that you were an English teacher for quite some time. As a teacher, and of course a building administrator, and superintendent, many different things. Please discuss how this experience will influence the way you oversee curriculum and the promotion of excellence in teaching and learning.
So I was a late bloomer because I wasn't quite sure that I wanted to be an administrator. I spent most of my career at East Bridgewater High School, 26 plus years as an English teacher, got another degree, and then thought, what am I going to do with this? And decided not to look back, and became the first female administrator at Middleborough High School. And then continued. My first love has always been curriculum. I think it's the best job going. I started as a curriculum director in Middleborough, had the great fortune of working with a terrific leader who became my mentor as I was moving up. Equity and excellence is really something that has always been the underpinnings for me. One of my professors, who was my dissertation chair, wrote a book called The Wounded Leader. And in it, he always talks about what you will fall on the sword for. Number one is students, and it's always about equity, and it's always about what excellence looks like. And I think that's a continual journey. As an administrator, I had many occasions to really look programmatically as a curriculum director and assistant superintendent for teaching and learning, to look at the barriers that exist in school districts with respect to equity. Because equity isn't really about equality. Equity is about giving equal opportunities to all students, and to figure out which ways that you can come up with the types of things, the resources, the staffing, the instructional approach that's going to work for them. And that's a journey. It's not an event, and every school district wants it. There isn't a school district who doesn't preach about equity. But I think we have to be very careful when we talk about what it looks like and what does excellence look like, because excellence is not for some, it's for all. And oftentimes we place barriers. It's been my experience, particularly at the secondary level. I remember when I was an administrator, we talked about the barriers for all students achieving. And some of the barriers were pretty simple. They were barriers such as having all of these prerequisites for students to be able to get into a class. That's a barrier for some students for a public high school, and we believe that all kids should succeed. Shouldn't we provide that opportunity and let them and their parents make that decision that it's not the right course or it's not the right program for them? So my two buzzwords, honestly, are equity and excellence. And I can give you lots of examples of things that I have done or had to look at, both as a superintendent, as an interim superintendent, but I'll stop there because I know it will come back up somewhere again, and I'll have that opportunity, hopefully. You're welcome.
Katie Roberts, you are up next. I think Katie is on.
Hi, Katie. I can't hear her.
Oh, I cannot either. Katie, you're not on
Katie,
mute.
you're-
Oh, yep, now we can.
You're muted, Katie.
Great, thank you. Hi, Dr. Nash. Katie Roberts, K-12 Science Director. It's very nice to
Hi,
meet
Katie.
you.
Nice to meet you.
So as part of our district's senior leadership team, which consists of principals, directors, and central office administrators, we're obviously very anxious to meet our new interim superintendent. So we're curious, in your role as interim superintendent, how would you go about building trust and ensuring a high-functioning leadership team during this recovery year ahead? And in what ways might you draw on the skills and institutional knowledge of current district leaders during your interim year?
Good question, thank you. Twofold. First of all, I have ongoing meetings, typically very similar to, I think, what the current superintendent has done. I have a team called the EAC, similar to what you have here. That team meets every other week. It's composed of the immediate building administrators as well as central office staff. In addition to that, I meet regularly, ongoing, individually with Director of Finance, PPS Director, Assistant Superintendent, Athletic Director. So there's a series of meetings that will happen on a regularly scheduled basis. In fact, there's usually a calendar that I put out. When I went back to Oxford, she just whipped out the same calendar again and changed the players because she knew that I was going to be doing it the same way. When COVID broke out, March 2020, we met weekly, as most school districts, weekly, every single Tuesday morning at 10:30. The entire administrative council, including all of the assistant principals, including my head nurse, including my union president, every single week at 10:30 until we were able to meet in person, which was sometime in August. I'm a strong believer in having constant communication with people, probably ad nauseum, particularly when you're an interim, because you've got to learn very quickly who's who and what the district immediately needs in order to open your schools. So I would envision starting out, and this is somewhat late. Most of my interims have started in July, so you have some opportunities to really do the one-on-one meetings or the small group meetings with all the stakeholders. You won't have that opportunity to do that as extensively coming in sometime in August. So what you'll have to do, your main goal is to open your schools, open them successfully, and make sure that all of your hiring is in place. So once you get that going, then you can go back and start having those one-on-one entry plan meetings that you typically have. But in the meantime, you'll have the calendar of meetings already set up for everybody. I also believe very strongly in meeting individually with my principals. We meet collectively every 2 weeks, but there are lots of issues that are germane more to elementary principals. Now, in this case, because this district has 4 elementary schools, I probably would bring my elementary principals in, but I also like to give them an opportunity to meet just one-on-one. Sometimes the issues that they have or the things that they want to talk to you about are not areas that others might want to talk to you about. So it's important to build ongoing communication. That's critical. Critical from day one when you're an interim, but critical for any superintendent who comes in on any basis, permanent or otherwise. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Thank you. Wendy, you're next.
Hi, I'm Wendy Rapson. I'm one of the kindergarten teachers in Foster School. My
had it tough.
Yeah, it's, yeah, 5-year-olds on Zoom was interesting, but they did really well. They rose to the challenge, and it ended up really a very nice class, and we did it. So my question for you has to do with teacher morale, and I'm wondering, how would you support teachers even in the face of like other pressures like the pandemic challenges, budget constraints, state mandates, increased testing and standards?
Well, first and foremost, I think, looking back, I'm sure as you look back, we closed out from March to June, and I think we just hung on. Let's get through it. I had a couple of really veteran teachers who I knew were really struggling. One was an elementary grade 1 teacher, and I knew that I met with her a number of times. She was near retirement to begin with, and I wasn't quite sure that she was going to make it from the March to June section, let alone looking ahead. We provided her, and a lot of it was the technology that she just was not comfortable with. So we provided her with a lot of supports and brought in people, did some training for her, gave her a support system, because I knew she was struggling with whether she was going to make it or not. And she wasn't just going to make it. She wanted to do it well, like she was used to. And she was a terrific teacher with kids in front of her without the technology. She was just one of those teachers that just struggled with it. So we gave her a lot of supports, brought in additional staff, and ended up that she stayed for a period of time. And then she decided, she said, I need to retire. It was her decision alone. But she wasn't alone in making that decision. I mean, she met with me. We had a lot of discussions about it. Gave her some advice with respect to HR to talk, because we do not have an HR person and did not have an HR person in Oxford, and supported her the best that we could. During the course of all of this, I probably meet more than any person with my union president. She and I had a terrific relationship, and it was built of trust. And if you didn't have that going into the pandemic, you were behind the 8 ball to begin with. I can't tell you how, the horror stories I would hear about superintendents trying to come up with MOAs to start the school year. I didn't have any of that. I sat down, we brought in some of my school committee members that were on the subcommittee, and we were able to do that. Part of it is building trust, that begins at the top with the union leadership, so that when she goes back and she knows that my word is going to be my bond. If I say I can do that, I'm going to be honest with you, and I'm going to tell you I can do that. If I can't, I can't. And I think having that open relationship disseminates to the staff, because when she would meet with her staff on issues, she was able to go back and say, I've already talked with Dr. Nash, this is what's going to happen. I'll give you a good example. At the end of the school year, we received $4.3 million in Oxford in ESER 2 and 3 money. And out of that, part of my exit plan was to leave the incoming superintendent, who was not an experienced central office administrator, with a recovery and acceleration plan, where we were hiring 38 new staff, where the class size next year, K4, will be 13 students. Wow, yes. And where we're doubling up in literacy coaches, reading. We based it on the research, the STAR research that talks about class size and the impact K4, and that's where we were putting all of our money. But the reason I talk about this is I think it was a critical piece in trying to understand where our staff was. And when we developed this plan, I shared it initially with the union president and said, I need your reaction because I want to know how teachers are going to feel. But part of this to happen means that I have to move grade 2 back. And remember, 3 years ago, they had already moved, and I know what it's like. So here's what I need for you to tell them. They don't need to touch a thing. I know they're going to want to pack up everything themselves. We'll pay for it. We'll take care of it. but I need your thoughts before we move forward. And I bring this to the school committee because it's best for students, number one. It now gives us a K-2 school, which is much better than the model we had, K-1, pre-K-1. And I want you to go back and ask the teachers. Meet with them. I'll meet with them, via Zoom, whatever, however we want to do it. But let's talk about it before we've got to be on board, all of us, if we're going to bring this forward. And they agreed. And so next year they'll move back again, and we'll have a 3-4 school and a K-2 school. But what they got in return was such a gift for the next 2 years, to have a class size of 13 and to have and to have additional reading support. So it's critical to have buy-in from your teachers. Without them, nothing works. We can lead it, but as I always used to say to my administrators, you're only as strong as the teachers that are in your building, because without them, nothing happens. Nothing happens. And our teachers, I'm sure, like Hingham, were dynamite this year. I never got a complaint from them. And I'll tell you, this was the year that people recognized the value of what teachers do in the classroom. I can't tell you how many parents said, oh, please, I don't care. Bring them back in April. They were saying, all the messages that we were sending out about health and safety and everything else, no matter how long they were, I think they skipped right through them and they simply said, when are you opening? And when are you bringing them back? And are they all going back? So it's critical. I mean, I've been in education so long, and been in the classroom as a classroom teacher so long before I made that shift. I still look through the lens of a teacher in many ways, even though as a superintendent, you have to look at a much bigger picture. So hopefully I answered your question.
Yes, no, you did. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Heather?
Hi, Heather Sullivan. Nice to meet you. English teacher for 25 years.
Okay, like me, like I was.
So started in 7th grade, 5 years in 7th grade, and then 20 years in 8th grade. When my father retired, my mother said, I can't eat 3 meals a day with that man. And so I was chuckling when you said that about your husband retiring. But anyway, so my question is similar to Wendy's in terms of a plan to support a positive and collaborative working environment for teachers, administrators, the fact that staff may feel burnt out, demoralized, under a microscope and criticized, during the pandemic, and just any kind of initiatives that maybe you've spearheaded in the past that helped to, kind of bring everyone together.
Certainly, I know we were fortunate when the pandemic broke out. We were able to move totally pre-K-12 to a one-to-one in technology. We just ripped all the cots apart, basically, and said, here you go, and then purchased anything else that we needed. And as part of our recovery plan, many of our teachers were dealing with 2 screens, and they were using their own laptops. They were, because whatever we had, maybe it wasn't robust at that time. So one of the things that I did as part of the recovery plan and meeting with the technology director and looking at what his needs were going to be was that we were outfitting every single teacher, professional support staff with new, more robust laptops beginning this year, because we don't want to lose the momentum of what the technology and integrating that did, and we recognize that so many of them were using their own devices, and so I thought it would be one way that we could recognize their hard work by doing that. So we worked that into the plan. Also looking again at how else can I support them. We know that part of the challenge that's going to happen opening in the fall is what's recovery going to look like for us. If you look at we looked at, when we started our plan, we based it on, there's not a lot of research out there right now that will tell you how far behind students are going to be. But the only real good piece that's out there is the NWEA study. So we used 2 things. We used the STAR report, which talks about really the impact of class size, particularly at the elementary level. And we used that to make some calculated deductions about how our students might be with respect to literacy, reading, and mathematics, because the NWEA suggests that, and it's not based on pandemic, it's really based on large studies of where students have been absent due to, let's say, catastrophic events in a country, where they had to shut down a school. So they're looking at that. And what they have found, at least initially, is that the gains that students make in mathematics are less than the gains that they'll make in reading. But the gains in reading are not as bad as you might think. It's somewhere in the 60th percentile. So you've got to be able to identify those students. So one of the things we did to answer your question was we recognized that we were going to ask our teachers to go back in. First of all, we gave them smaller class sizes, K-4. So you can really individualize and work with small groups. When you have 13 to 15 students in the K-4 environment, you would kill for that as an elementary teacher. But you're responsible for those students. Who's going to then provide the additional support services that we need? The principal has to figure out how to do it. That's the other crazy piece of this. So we ended up adding, intervention specialist, literacy specialist. But then you've got to look at when are you going to do this, who's going to do it, what instructional resources, and how you're going to identify kids. So you can have all of this other stuff going on, but if you don't have that in place, then it doesn't matter. So part of that also meant for this district that I was in last year to put in place a central office person to orchestrate or oversee all of this to ensure it happened. And what we did was to identify those areas in literacy where we knew we would need additional intervention resources. All of this goes back to support the classroom teacher. We're not asking the classroom teacher to do that. We want them to focus on those students. They can already tell you who those students will be. They know. Any great elementary teacher knows. And we don't have to use a lot of data. We've got a lot. We've got dibbles and everything else that we've used forever, running records and everything that we can use to figure that out. We don't need to get high in the clouds here on this, but we've got to have a very good plan in place. And a lot of districts fall short. They say they're doing, tiered intervention, but oftentimes they're not. One, you've got to be able to schedule it. In elementary, it's a nightmare. Middle school, it's even worse. Yeah, so one of the things we did was to create a flex block in a middle school, right, and then to add at the elementary as another special. So how do you do it? I mean, those are the real conversations you have with your principals and saying, okay, I'm giving you all of this support. Now, you've got to figure this out, or we've got to figure it out collectively together. How are you going to make this happen? And I wish I were there to see it, because I would love to have seen in the next 2 years the impact of this money. We did not have to use ESSER money to balance our budget. So we were in great shape. I had $1.5 million left at the end of this year, and I had $1.5 million left last year. So I was in great shape from a financial point of view. So I'm going to pour that back in to recovery and acceleration, and that was the goal of us. And that really supports teachers when they see that. When you say you're going to hire 38 staff and you're going to at least give them that support that they're going to need, I think that's a critical message that it sends to your staff, that you care about them and that you care about the kids. Yeah. Sorry, so passionate
don't be
about
sorry.
some of this. It's very exciting to me in many ways to be able to do some of this work, even as an interim superintendent. I don't ever consider myself, the word interim is there, and I recognize that. But if you're a superintendent, you're a superintendent. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Tim Miller-Dempsey, next.
I'm Tim Dempsey. I'm a school committee member. And I've also been a teacher for 25 years in a different district.
Okay.
And I know you've touched on this before, but I imagine all of the questions are things you've touched on before. It's the questions written beforehand. But you said one of your big passions was curriculum.
Yes.
And I was wondering what you thought the challenges and opportunities, and just how is curriculum going to change due to COVID and the pandemic and sort of the past year that everyone has had? So what's down the road for that, both in terms of technology and just in general?
Well, I think if you had a consistent, clear, articulated curriculum that people followed, you're ahead of the game. And if you had narrowed it down, in Hanover and in some of the other districts I was in, we used a mapping system, whether you used Rubicon Atlas or Curriculum Mapper or one of those, to bring consistency and clarity, and to bring to our staff what we called our guaranteed curriculum. In other words, when we talk about equity, we really talk about what's the guarantee that every single student gets, no matter who that student is, that you as the teacher teach it between September and June. And if something happens, i.e. a pandemic, okay, we know where we are because we're teaching the standards. We're not telling you how to teach them. We're saying, here's the big picture. You need to teach all of these standards, and they need to happen between here and here. Now, if you get staff, and particularly at the elementary level and middle school too, high school's a little different because of the way they're set up. I call them as a former high school teacher, kind of my vigilantes. They're out there, we're content driven and we don't collaborate and we're the masters of our content. And the reality is they need to collaborate even more. They need to be more like middle and elementary teachers, I think. But in most instances, our teachers would meet in PLC time on a weekly basis, even during the pandemic online, and they would look at where they were. So they had a good handle by the end of the year on what they could and could not get through. Typically, there isn't a lot of research out there that tells you, has indicated whether or not staff were able to complete all of the standards. My hunch is they weren't. My hunch is they weren't. And thus, they're going to have to go back. And one of the things we talked about in last year with my administrative team was, should we open the school year as last year in place, not move kids for the first couple weeks and do reteach? Should we do that? Do we have enough data to indicate that that's, and where should we do it? We're not going to probably do it 9-12 because it's driven differently. But should we look at that at the elementary grades early on, and for all grades or some? So we had that conversation. So the better that you have a group of teachers, grade level teachers, departments, that you can have those conversations with to know, and you can only have those if they have articulated, guaranteed curriculum, meaning that somewhere they have agreed, this is what we teach, these are the standards we teach, because you can't teach them all. So years ago when it first came out, I was fortunate enough to do some work under Heidi Hayes-Jacob, and this was prior to technology evolving, and we were doing our mapping in Middleborough by hand. And then finally we were able to purchase, the system and went forward with the guaranteed maps. They did their maps monthly, so that at the end of a month, they would look to see what did we teach and what did we not teach, and could we move forward that way. So critical piece, I think there has to be conversations. I don't know what the professional development schedule is here, but I believe that you need to have those conversations and build in time at the beginning of the school year. For just as we did this past year, we had those 10, 11 days, which was really a gift, if you will, to get people prepared. I think it would behoove districts to have front-loaded their school calendars this year. It was one of the things that I had, as I was leaving, telling the person who succeeded me, you need to go back to the school committee in July, and you need to put in some half days. You've got to do it. We didn't. So I hope I answered your question.
I have the next question. I'm Michelle Ayer. I'm the vice chair of the school committee. And I've been on, this is my 5th year, starting my 5th year. So my question is more student related. So this actually has to do with our METCO program. So Hingham is very honored and privileged to host a METCO program. So we were wondering, do you have any experience with METCO, and how would you support the METCO students, the families, the METCO director, and staff?
We had METCO in Dover Sherborne. So it was my first experience. We did not have it in Hanover. I think you have about 51 students, if I remember correctly. First of all, they're our students. I don't care where they come from. They're our students. And, equity is about all. And so I think that's the key. MECO was formed in the 60s really as a voluntary way to desegregate schools and to give students, particularly from urban districts, the opportunities to experience things very differently. And I've seen it from a couple of lenses, and I think it certainly is a tradition that many districts use to incorporate diversity, but I'm cautious when I say that I don't want this to sound as a negative, but it's important simply that they are our students, period. And whatever students need to be successful is the job of public education. They happen to be students, whether they're disabled or whether they're MECO students. Our job is to ensure that we provide them with all of the supports they need. You're welcome.
John?
Hi, John. I was waiting for a business.
Yeah, okay, so now you're going to get it, okay.
That $1.5 million that you had in years.
So I'm the Director of Business and Support Services. It probably says so on the sign here, yes. So my question relative to the MSBA, you may be aware we're involved with 2 MSBA projects, one a core project for a brand new elementary school.
Right.
And one
project?
And one for the window project
Yep.
for PRS.
Right.
So my question has to do, and both of them enjoy like widespread approval in the town of Hingham. I mean, the votes have been unanimous to get the monies for, feasibility studies, et cetera. But so, and we're sort of early in the process, and we're just bringing on a designer for the Foster School. And so the question has to be, in a state of transitional leadership, how do you go about creating that educational profile for this brand new elementary school that will sort of set Hingham up for the future, right? Because we can't build a school for next year or the way we did. We're looking, in the future direction. So how do you go about that in a state of transitional leadership?
Let me just make sure I understand. One is really a Windows kind of project, I call the Windows boilers type of project, and the other is more substantial, I think eligibility applicant for potentially the renovation or a brand new school. Is that?
Yes, and we're already there. So I mean,
you've been
already
accepted.
We've been accepted. We're in feasibility to the extent that we're going to evaluate a brand new school versus a remodel or
Right.
renovation. But then, along with that will be the real critical part is what does your educational profile look like?
Right.
Where are you going in the future?
Right.
And so that's where it is.
I love this question.
In this transitional leadership state, how
So-
will you go about leading that effort?
So Hanover High School was the first high school in the state that did not use the model school. All right. Model school at that time, when we were looking, was Whitman Hanson. My belief is that you have to do educational planning. I mean, you don't go out and build the same house that your neighbor does because you look at what your needs are. I have a family of 5. I need 5 bedrooms. And so when I inherited the position in Hanover, they already had a failed initiative twice, but they already had the plans. They had, all the plans. They had done their feasibility study, and they were ready to go. All they needed was to get a successful vote. So they asked me as the new superintendent to review the plans because I had to endorse it, but I was not part of it. So they gave me the styrofoam pictures, and in about an hour or so of studying it, I had 30 or 40 Post-it notes on it with questions. And the biggest question that I had was really about equity, because they had designed this high school and put special ed kids behind the cafeteria. That wasn't going to happen. And I was really concerned that this was a school we were building it for my grandmother. It was the typical high school. And I was really concerned that this was a school that we were building it for my grandmother. It was the typical high school. 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 It was the typical hig We call them double cells. All the English teachers are here, all the math teachers are here, all the science, all the history, and so forth. And I thought, oh my gosh, why are we building a high school for the past? We need to build it for the future. So much has changed about the way we think about education. So the chair of the building committee got upset with me and said, I don't understand why you can't endorse this. I said, in good conscience, I can't. It's not an educational plan for the future. This is not a high school of the future. And let alone where you are putting kids with disabilities, you know. So he said, well, what do you want to do? Just like that. And I said, I don't know, let me think about it. Let me think about it. So I started to do some research, and I said, I need an educational planner. I need someone who can see it through the lens of both an architect, but also who understands programming at a high school. And I started looking online, and I found a company in Ohio, DeJong and Locker. And I called them up and said, do you have anybody local? Well, lo and behold, this gentleman, Frank Locker, was breaking away from it, from that company, and he formed his own company. He still has it to this day, and he does educational planning. And we brought in 33 people representing a diverse constituency of our staff, and we did planning. But before we brought them in, I said to Frank, I want you to do planning with my teachers at the high school. He said, what do you mean? I said, they need to buy in on whatever model we come up with. They're going to own it, live it, and have to teach in it. He said, well, I've never had to do that before. I said, well, it's okay. They're dripping money my way, so we're going to do it. So my teachers looked at 11 different high school models. Hanover High School is not your typical high school. My teachers live collaboratively together. I have English, math, foreign language, history, all living in a communal space, and they share space. And my classrooms are not the same size. So educational planning would be the first step to figure out, what does an elementary school of the future look like? What should it look like? How do we teach literacy? One of the things that we want is small breakout rooms. Within Hanover High School, we created rooms within rooms. We took 100 square feet on both sides of a room, and if a teacher wanted to do a breakout session at a high school and wanted to send some kids off, they could do that. My hallways are U-shaped, not long hallways, and anywhere you put kids, you could see. So you've got to do that. Now, I don't know where you are, and again, an interim superintendent coming in is going to be tasked with some things that they have to pick up and carry the torch on. Okay. Critical piece to me would be doing that. So, having said that, and I know this is long-winded, but I take this as a compliment from MSBA. So, they weren't doing educational planning at MSBA. They weren't doing it. Now you have to do it, right? So, we talked with them and said, look, we can't go forward because we need, with this design right now, we need to do some educational planning. And they said, well, you know, your school is going to be built for X amount of students, and that's it, based on the NESDEC studies or whatever projections. We said to them, well, you don't understand. A high school isn't about, it's not like an elementary school where I can say I can put 20 kids in a classroom. We run programs, just like an elementary school is not like a middle school. So we had lots of discussions with them about doing that first, and we did that. Now it's required. Now it's required. And Frank Locker is one of the busiest people probably out there doing this. He's a New Hampshire resident, so he's accessible. But I would say you would want to create a diverse committee, particularly get your teachers, because they're the ones who are going to live this. And get them involved, as well as us. They know what works and doesn't work. And having that first group, they widowed down 11 different high school models to a few. And their model was about flexibility, collaboration, were two key elements that they wanted. And if you look at Hanover High School, that's really how it was built. So.
Thank you. The next question comes from Liza O'Reilly, who is on the Zoom.
Sorry, I'm not looking this way. I know, I'm looking.
Sorry.
Hi, Liza.
Involved in listening to your question. So I'm on the school committee. I'm in my third term, my 8th year.
I have 3 kids. 2 have graduated from Hingham Public Schools, and my youngest will be a senior. So I've been around, I know all these 25-year plus teachers from my own experience. So thank you for coming. Hingham appropriated nearly a 9% budget increase for fiscal year 22, supported by federal ESSER funds and one-time money from the town's fund balance. The increase will result in a town-wide revenue deficit for fiscal year 23 and beyond, without an operational override to continue the supports being funded. Our town is aware of that we may come back, we will be coming back to request an override for next year. How would you support the district through an override request that can be in sync with a currently undeveloped strategic plan?
That's a wonderful question. Let's see, that's an easy question. So let me understand this. So you had a 9% increase for FY22, of which to balance that and to get that, you used ESSER money, which is one-time money, which will go away in 2 years, correct?
ESSER
And the town?
fund balance.
Yes.
Whoa, okay.
It may be 1 year.
It may be,
1 year, we're using it all this year.
okay. So, all right,
Our portion,
Okay.
the town's got a little, but.
So you're going to fall off the cliff at the end of FY22, in essence, without additional funding. And those conversations certainly have taken place, I would assume, between the current superintendent and the town manager and the FinCom and the school committee members with respect to that. So my first question would be, and what was the conversation that occurred as to the next piece of this plan? Because I'm sure you looked beyond this year. You know, I know that when we planned for 2 years, and I know that there's going to be a cliff, but I also know the positions that we put in our plan are not necessarily needed. So I'm sure that some of the positions that you might have put in are not going to be needed positions for part of your recovery.
Some, but most of them have been needed for a long time, and
Yeah.
so that the challenges were exposed during COVID, and we provided these committees with details finally that they understood our needs.
And may I ask another question? I'm sorry in answering.
Sure.
And so in addition to this, you also, your timing is that you have a building project, potentially.
Yes.
And you have the potential of an override. Is that an override to keep level services or an override to continue with the additional positions that you've put in place as a result of either ESSER needs or, as you indicate, long-term needs that you've had that you've been able to kind of segue in? Because I looked at your FY22 budget and you kind of meshed both. And we did that a little bit too. We did that. I needed to introduce foreign language at the middle school, and I meshed that in because I needed that. So, but the problem is what happens in, 2 years. All right, so you want me to answer that? Do you want me to wait?
We're not sure anymore.
So I just want to make sure, and I would want this position why. You're going to have some serious meetings with your town early and often, your town manager and your director of finance in the town, and whoever serves on your school committee from the budget perspective, and start having some conversations about planning, looking at revenue forecasting. Towns got money. I'm assuming the town of Hingham got some ESSER funds too, and they may have used it to balance their budget. So therefore, they may not want to, give you too much.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah. It's easy. You're going to have to look at cuts if you don't get an override. I mean, that's the bottom line of any school budget. And normal school budget needs somewhere between low of 3 to 6% just to stay level services every single year. And when you're trying to build a recovery budget, you know that most of those positions are going to be for recovery for a shorter period of time. But you also have to take into account that the town now has the potential of having to eat at the end of that all of the unemployment cost. And I don't know what the town charter is here, but in Oxford, when we created the 38 positions, I had to go to my town manager and say, are you prepared for 38 new positions for health benefits? Now, I knew what the answer was. No, we're not. We don't have that money. And I had to work that into the grant, which you can do, of course. Remember that discussion we all had about could you do that? I don't have an answer for you. I think it's going to be a discussion that if that is a key, and you say as a school committee, when I meet with members individually, and you say that's your priority, then I'm going to have to sit down and have some discussions early on, and that will become a chief priority for me. Looking at how do I do this? How do I sit and look at, what the needs are and balance with the fact that there may not be enough money to support those needs. And you're just going to have some serious discussions early on. Typically, I meet with the town manager and the director of finance in a town early in the fall to look at what I call budget forecasting, the health of the town, I used to call it. What's the town look like for next year? What are you projecting in new growth and all of that, revenues? And those conversations are probably going to have to start earlier than that. So I don't have an answer for you. I don't have a magic ball that I could, or I don't have $1.5 million left over or something that I could say to you is going to help. You're going to have to do a deep dive then also into your budget early on, start having those conversations. It'd be important for us to look at. I read the positions that you added, and, they're all great positions. And I know you probably want to keep them as we do after the end of 2 years. And the only thing you could start to project would be retirements, because that you've got the trade-off of a retirement on a high end, hopefully, that you could potentially keep some of those essential positions that way. And I don't know what the numbers look like, but yeah. So I don't have an answer for you.
Just so you know, there are regular discussions constantly between the school department
Yes,
and the town, and so we have a forecast group that goes through those revenue projections often.
Okay. Starts having those conversations early, right? So it's no surprise, right?
We've been having them all year long.
Right. Well, that's the good and bad with Easter money. The good part was it was like error money. The good part was you can do some things, but the bad part is it's going to go. And if you use it to start balancing your budget or to start adding positions that you want to keep permanently, you're going to have the cliff like we all had when error money was out there years ago. And my teachers would be used to having 13 to 15, and at the end of 2 years at elementary, wonder why now it's back up to 18, 19, or 20. But they had it for 2 years. So it's always making the best of worst choices sometimes. And Hanover, so that you are aware, there wasn't a year superintendent that I didn't lay off staff. I never had a budget that was anywhere close to giving me a level services budget. It was almost every year layoffs, either through people who are retired or simply having to cut staff. It's not ever fun to do, but the reality is the biggest part of your budget is salaries. So that's usually where you end up going. So.
Thank you. Yes, Jen.
I'm Jen Badham. I'm on my second year on the school committee, and I have 3 students in the secondary level here in Hingham Public Schools. And my question is regarding communication. You talked about constant communication with your leadership team and building that ongoing communication. And mine is more around communication with parents. It's vital in the public school district, communication with parents and staff. And one positive thing that came out of the pandemic is increased engagement with families. How would you capture the energy of this stakeholder group and use it for the betterment of Hingham Public Schools?
If you were a superintendent during the pandemic and you were not a communicator or a collaborator, you better had changed your ways quickly or else you weren't going to succeed. I think my parents were as every parent probably, were inundated on a weekly, if not more than that basis, with communication. It was to the point of nausea. By about March, of this past March, because we had been hitting them since August, they would be getting those communications. And unfortunately, we couldn't do them in, Twitter. They were too long. There were too many health and safety issues that we were addressing. So you were doing these long letters and attachments. And I know every parent was like, oh, could you just cut to the chase? So a couple of them actually told me that, and in nice ways. And I said, good, okay, the old English teacher in me, I'm going to stop bulleting things, because English teachers tend to be wordy. So I started bulleting things and numbering them, trying to think about how learners learn. And actually, I had a couple of parents say, I liked your last letter. I went, you did? So communication is critical. And I think similar to technology, where we don't want to lose the momentum for the way we really had to use technology. We want to make it job embedded if we can continue to do that. Our parents had to be good readers, good listeners, whether they liked it or not. They would get them from me, from the principal, from the finance director, from the PPS director. So it's good to continue those, I think, on a weekly basis. In Dudley Charlton, I used to do a Friday, I forget what I called it, Friday's Corner or something, and would send it out to parents just in bullet form. Here's what's going on this week, some things I want to tell you about. Here's what's coming up. I know you've already heard it, but, kind of whatever. So you do want to communicate. I know that was something that was mentioned, communication, particularly among schools, but also, engaging parents in whatever way you can. Social media, certainly, to do it quick and easy. Get something out there is important, too, critical. You continue it. You're used to it now. Writing, for me, is relatively easy. I write everything. I do not, and edit it more times than I should, probably, because, again, English teacher in me, and dwell over every word, and sometimes I wish I didn't, particularly when you were putting something out 2 or 3 times a week. And then delegating, ensuring that others communicate on a regular basis, too, is I think, very important. One of the things that we found was we were sending out not mixed messages, but they were getting the same message from me, and then getting it from my head nurse, and then they were getting it from a principal, and I don't blame them. Parents were like, ugh. But our parents were truly, as I'm sure Hingham parents are too, were really partners. They were so patient, so cooperative. But they wanted questions answered. We did a lot of Q&A sessions, just open Zooms every week sometimes. And my elementary principals were really good at doing them and handling them, and I would be available if it was what they would call a question beyond their pay grade. And I would be there to answer them. But I think our parents felt reassured. So it's a good practice, unfortunately, coming out of a bad thing. And it reawakened the fact that communication is a critical piece of what we do in our business. We do our business and we think, great, we know what we're doing, but sometimes we don't get the message out there. And our teachers became great communicators with parents because now they had to do it so differently. They had to figure out ways of doing it. So those are the benefits from something so tragic that you want to try to continue to nurture in whatever way that you can. You're welcome.
Ness has our next one.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm Ness Currenti. I'm on the school committee. I have kids in each level. I have an incoming 9th grader, so I'm going to be interested in the communication and how much I get inundated with it, but I definitely appreciate it. I am going to reflect on your answer from Liza's question, which is the budget. I'm a CPA, so numbers by trade, but equity by passion. And I appreciated how your honesty in that question about how, you're going to have to communicate and sit down with people and figure out how we move forward, because I think it's really important. And it's important to stabilize our district because we've had a lot of turnover. We've had a superintendent for 2 years. We have 2 principals who are going to be interim principals. And so, collectively we've got this trauma that we're dealing with, and now we've got this possible Yes, this instability going on. So wondering how you can help lead our district with everything going on. As Liza mentioned, we got the 9% budget increase. With that came the strategic plan that we were hoping to initiate and get going. So how could you lead us through that process as we are, just getting under wraps?
The process of the strategic plan or the process of just?
The process of getting us through, we are hoping to.
All the change.
All of the change
Okay.
and working through that
Sure.
strategic plan with the community that's possibly unstable.
So let me kind of reflect on what I found over the 4 times that I've been an interim superintendent, that the role of an interim superintendent really is, and it is very different than a permanent superintendent in many ways. Certainly not from the day-to-day expertise that you need in decision-making, because anyone who's a veteran superintendent has made every decision possible that they've ever had to make, tough decision. There's just no way around it if you've done the job for a period of time. But in the role of an interim superintendent, I kind of, particularly if you're in a district in most instances for the year, I see it kind of in 3 phases. The first is what you talked about a little bit, and that is the immediacy. Immediacy is that you need to bring stability. You need to review and revive confidence. So, and it happens in 2 types of districts, and coincidentally, you probably represent one of those 2 types. The first district is that you need to do that and need to focus on that, usually in your first month or so. Sometimes it can be longer, and I'll talk about how you go about doing that in a minute, is that a district typically, unlike yours, who might have had turnover, the district that I went back to had 4 superintendents in 5 years. I was the longest serving superintendent, and I was an interim. I had spent 16 months plus a year prior to that. So number one, they needed stability. They needed to know that whoever was going to lead, they could have confidence in, they could trust them, they felt good, because they had all this change around them, plus they had the pandemic. So seeing a familiar person, probably from their perspective, the committee brought back a familiar face, and someone that I would say probably they felt very good about when I was there the last time. So that made it so much easier than bringing in someone else for them. In this case, the other type of district where you get this angst on all people's parts are districts where you've had the same superintendent or not many changes in superintendency. So I think in reading a little bit about this district, you have 18 superintendents in 150 years. Well, that's an average of roughly 8+ years. There's not a lot of change, but when you think about it, in these 4 years that are coming, 2 that have happened, this year that you're going to have an interim, and then you're permanent, you'll have had 3 superintendents in 4 years. So the first thing that an interim has to do is to create a sense of stability, trust. People, okay, they're going to lead this district, we're going to be fine. You do that in meetings. This is why those entry meetings are really important. Or if you come in July, you have an opportunity to meet with all of the people you need to meet with, to reassure them, from your administrative team who you're going to be leading all year, to your school committee members, to your parent groups, just to talk with them. So they, as I say, they know you know what you're doing. They feel better. That's the first piece. The second part of that is kind of addressing the strategic plan that you talked about. So now people feel comfortable. They know you can lead this district. What's the next piece of that? The next piece is, so what's the focus going to be? What are the needs? Some of those are already there and they exist. Immediate needs, building, strategic plan, budget. Those 3 things just stick out right away. So that's going to be your focus. And unless other things come along that you have to deal with, that are student-oriented, decisions you have to make because you don't avoid those decisions, you're going to focus on those things. Because you only have generally a year, and there are some things that, from a perspective of an interim, you can address and you shouldn't address. because it's for the permanent. So that leads me to the third piece of this. Critical to all of this is near the end of that year is to do transition. As an interim, I've done it 4 times. And it looks very different depending on who's coming into this chair. In 3 of my instances, I had sitting superintendents come in. You do not transition those individuals in the same way that you transition. In the case of Oxford, a high school principal moved in to become superintendent. And my transition plan for him was very different than I would have developed for a sitting superintendent. Now, there's 2 pieces to that. There's the exit plan that you have to do as the interim superintendent, and then there's the transition plan. So those components really are what make up the almost the year someone is here. But getting back to your question, if the priority of the district at this point in time is we do not want to just stay, an interim superintendent should not be a caregiver, should not be about status quo. I have never been in a district where I've been the caregiver. That is not the way I operate. Interim is there, and I recognize there are things that I cannot do because of the period of time, and I should not do because I'm not the permanent superintendent. You know, that's the difference, and it's very different if you've never done an interim. That was the first experience that I had. I saw so many things in Freetown Lakeville. When I walked in, I had no assistant superintendent, no business director, no PPS director, and I had 2 principals, 2 elementary principals. That's what I had to hire. 1 came in, sorry, the PPS director they had hired. The rest of them we had to hire. There were only so many things that you can do in the year, and we had to prioritize what was important. You already have some of those, and it would be critical for this person to take the lead from the school committee, who says, we want you to focus on these things. You don't want someone just coming in to maintain. That's not what you want, because you lose a year. It's the same thing we say when a teacher isn't performing well. That kid doesn't get to redo that year, and you don't want that. And it's critical that through what I would do, you would know that that's not going to be the case. You would know that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very
Before
much.
you get to the next question, can you just check the battery on that computer?
Oh,
Because I
yes.
thought I heard it ding.
Okay, sorry. I'm just going to check the battery on this computer because, right, you guys are still there.
They are.
Oh, although it is.
I thought I heard it
running
ding,
low.
yeah.
Sorry, I just don't know where the
The plug is.
plug is to,
What do you have for a charger?
I don't know. That's how you guys, it's literally, the battery is literally about to die. So we don't want to lose you at this important juncture. Just as Carrie's about to ask her question.
Oh, the Hingham strip? Is it not plugged in?
Check the connection
Oh.
to the laptop, but
Yeah, I think
yeah.
it looks like it's definitely in, right? This is it. It doesn't. I can't tell if it's charging or not.
I can't tell either.
All right. Maybe we shouldn't waste any more time and let Carrie ask her question.
Oh, yeah, yeah, that was on.
Oh, okay.
That was off
We're good.
before. Okay.
Sorry, the power cord was gone. Was it off? All right, Carrie, you're up. Sorry.
Turn the power strip on.
Thank you very much. So I'm Carrie D. I'm starting my 4th year on the committee and my 2nd term. So my question is, could you tell us about a major controversy or confrontation that you faced during your career, how you dealt with it, and what you learned from it?
As a permanent or as an interim? Which would you like?
I guess interim.
Walking in last February, I had a number of, well, let me walk that back. In 2017-18, when I first was appointed as the interim superintendent in Oxford, I had a personnel issue. Most of the serious issues that you typically have deal with people, unfortunately. And it was an issue that potentially put students at risk. It had to do with a teacher. And I had a brand new high school principal at that time. I had not hired her. She had already been hired prior to my coming on board. And we had received an anonymous call around this individual. So to make a long story short, this was a case that took us months to investigate because it was interstate. And it was a case that actually led in the termination of the individual. And, it is probably, as an interim, as a permanent superintendent, you're going to have those things during the course of your tenure as a superintendent of schools. Typically, you hope that you have a quiet year as an interim, as I had hoped I would have a quiet year walking in back to Oxford, but that's not the case. When I walked into Oxford this past year, I also had 2 teachers who were out on leave and had to deal with those. In Hanover, I had probably the issue that most superintendents hope they never had. It was about sports. And you never won a sports issue, and it was about a coach. And I also had that same issue in Dudley Charlton as an interim, and it was, of course, about a football coach, which is generally the sport that most people, other than ice hockey in Hanover, most people think is paramount. Not myself necessarily included. So personnel issues would be up there. The other issue is always budget, budget issues. Fighting for the budget was very typical of us in Hanover, particularly with and I don't mean literally fighting, but advocating for the budget. And I had a very strong school committee who understood what their role was, but also their job was to advocate what the needs are. If you never advocate what the needs are, then you never know what they are. The reality is you may not get it, but people never know that you need. You never communicate that to people. And I think that was critical for us to do, and for me to take a very active role as the face of the district, to be willing to put myself out there to say, this is what we need, this is why we need it, this is why we cannot continue to endure budget cuts if the outcome is going to be this. So those 2 areas are probably areas that I would say were areas that you learn a lot about as you go through them, but you also need to recognize community and the community role support that you have. And that's one of the things that I think is also very critical. Know who your stakeholders are, know how your community thinks and operates, be involved and engaged as you can with them to understand what they value and what they don't value.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, and then our final question is from Carlos De Silva. Carlos is also on the Zoom.
Hi, Carlos.
Good morning, Dr. Nash. Thanks so much for interviewing with us. So my name is Carlos Da Silva. I've been on the school committee, started in my 6th year, 2nd term. I'm a proud parent of 2 graduates of the Hingham Public Schools. And my question to you is, what would your friends say about you?
What would my friends say? My professional friends or my personal friends?
Either one.
Either professional or personal. My professional friends would say I'm a good friend and a mentor. I'm really proud that one of my colleagues who worked for me is now the superintendent of schools in Holliston. I speak with her daily. In fact, we laughed about it because when I stopped and went back into retirement, I no longer was calling her at 7:15 in the morning every day. And the other day I called her simply to say, guess where I am? I'm walking the canal. Where are you? and she said, I'm going to work. I said, good for you. And have you settled your contract? They would say that a friendship is important. From a professional perspective, to me, mentoring. I've been in this profession for a long time. I've given everything that I really have to this profession. It's been a joy and a pleasure. The most important thing for me is to see smiles on kids' faces and to see my staff happy and my principals satisfied with the work they're doing. It speaks volumes about it. I can tell you this. last week I received, maybe this is the best way to sum it up from a professional perspective, I received when I left Oxford, they gave me some things, and I thought they were really too generous, and they didn't have to do that, especially the second time around. But 2 weeks went by or so, and this last week I received a card, and the card was from one of my assistant principals. It wasn't from the principals, it wasn't from the business director, it wasn't from my assistant super, people that I probably see on a very regular, almost daily basis. It was from a high school assistant principal. And it was a very touching message. And it made me feel, what he talked about was the value of feeling valued. I'm a firm believer in, we're all in this together, and I share an awful lot. I'm not a superintendent who cloisters himself and feels like you don't need to know this because you're only an assistant principal. Somewhere along the line, that person may become a principal. It's important for me to give back, for us to mentor. And I think they would say that she's a good mentor, and she's a good friend from a professional perspective. And to this day, I'm having dinner this week with my high school principal from Apponequet, because we still maintain a friendship. She's now the Bourne assistant superintendent, and she wanted to meet with me. And to me, those relationships are critical. So from that perspective, professional, I enjoy keeping those relationships going. I think they're important. I hope that's what they would say. She was a good listener and a good support, because I had those people when I first moved up. And if I didn't have those people supporting me in my first year, where would we be? And that's, I think, critical.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome, fellows.
Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That ends our questions. Anything for us before we let you go?
No, I would say you have some decision to make. Interestingly enough, I was saying to someone, I know Gary Maestas. I actually hired Gary when he moved from New Mexico, and we gave him his first job as a middle school principal in Old Rochester. And of course, I worked in Dover-Sherborne, so I don't know Andy, but I know of him. The difference between myself and those gentlemen, and they're both very capable, we're all obviously experienced superintendents, is that I've been in the role of an interim a number of times now, and I think that's a big difference, and have seen different districts from all different levels. And I would say one final thing, too. When you're an interim in a multiple town district, if you can be an interim in a regional school district when it comes to budget, every other budget looks simple, quite honestly, because you're dealing with multiple personalities. It's not one of anything, as John, you probably know. But I've enjoyed meeting with you, and I wish you good luck. I know it's a trying time, but believe me, again, your selection, you'll be in good hands, whoever you select, and hopefully it will be I.
Dr. Nash,
You're
we
welcome.
really appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was nice to meet you.
It was nice to meet you.
Meeting you.
Very nice meeting you. Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day, hopefully.
Go back into retirement.
Exactly, go back into retirement for at least a little.
Yeah, I'm glad you're not running for the hills after that budget discussion.
No.
Good.
Thank you. Take care.
All right,
Thank you so much.
Sorry about all the cords.
Nope.
All right, Carrie, I'm gonna turn you guys around again. Thank you. At least you can see me.
That's you.
Oh, sorry, somebody's phone's ringing. Not me.
Want to make sure you know your way out.
Oh,
You can go out
thanks,
this way,
John.
too,
John's just
whatever
making
way
sure.
you like.
Are we just
You
adjourning,
can go out
Carrie?
this way or that way?
No, the
That's
next
through
thing
the office.
we're
Have you walked through the office? Okay, Jerry,
talk
can you
about
figure out? Okay.
just initial thoughts on the candidates.
Okay.
And especially I wanted to hear from the school staff for the too. So the school committee will discuss this on Monday night amongst ourselves, and I mean obviously we should chime in too, but I want to make sure we heard from the staff members.
Okay. I'm gonna turn you a little bit more so you can see more staff members.
Hey, guys.
You wanna, oh, you know what, let me just, are we, actually, yeah, we keep the filming going, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just asking you to close the door.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Do you want us to excuse ourselves?
The public can say, no, it's still an open meeting, so you can stay. Yes. Oh, and it's still being recorded, yes. And actually, we should leave the door open, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, I
No,
apologize.
that's okay,
Yeah.
because people could still come in, because it's
Got
an
it.
open meeting. Thank you.
I apologize.
No worries. All right, so Carrie, take us away.
Yeah, just initial thoughts, just what are people thinking?
Well, I'll go first. I was impressed the most by Gary Maestas and just his energy, his approachability, his enthusiasm. I thought he had a very honest and open kind of demeanor, and the fact that he had worked with the MSBA, and he mentioned Jack McCarthy and just being familiar with the process and the people involved. I thought that, that was great. Let's see, when he said his friends would describe him as a nut, nutty, there were definitely moments when I felt it was very real, very relatable, and I appreciated that about him. And let's see, what else did I write down about Gary? I did watch the videos, the Plymouth videos. I thought they were inspirational. I did speak to a friend who works in the Plymouth district who gave very high praise, said that he was not only an excellent superintendent, but just a wonderful human being, that both kids and staff really respected him and loved him. So he would be at the top of my list. I do think that with Kris Nash, what she just said about having gone through the interim process 4 times, that to me was the strongest selling point. Well, she was also an English teacher for 28 years, so of course initially on paper she was my first choice for that reason. But I do think that obviously there's a benefit to that. So I guess if I were to rank order, I would say Gary, Christine, and then Andrew would be my choices. So, yeah.
Yeah, we have 3 great candidates.
Yeah,
I
that's-
think
We do, and I think they could all do the
Couldn't
job
pick
well.
one or who we choose, but and I will say I've spoken to a number of people in Plymouth too, parents, teachers, and the people that are just superintendents in the out in the field, and they rave about Gary, which is great. So, okay, does anyone else have?
Well, there's not a lot for me to say now. I echo. No, that's perfectly fine. I absolutely agree with everything that you said. I would do the same rank order. I feel like Gary would give us the healing that we need this next year of all the candidates. I mean, they all have different things that they're going to bring. Obviously, it seems like Nash would bring more budget, which probably is top of school committee mind. As a teacher, I feel like Gary would just be so beneficial for what we're going to be going through this next year and set us up for an excellent recovery. So that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I'm happy to go next, Carrie. Thank you. Just putting this in kind of the bigger picture, an interim is coming in by definition during a time of upheaval. So, we're, as we've said before, first of all, hoping for someone to calm the waters, and then to move the ball forward. Do you think that check in that terms of the waters, as others have strong reputation and dealing with all of the stakeholders, from the administration to the teachers, to the parents and to the students. And again, in terms of I'm a scientist, I look for evidence. The videos alone really communicated his emphasis on student-centeredness, the fact that he actually gave students a voice in that launch to the year, I thought was a really powerful indicator that he means it when he says he's student-centered. In terms of that second piece of moving the ball forward, if you look at the growth of Plymouth's program under his tenure, he supported innovation, and he left that district when he found it.
Did you say better than
So,
Better,
when
yeah.
they projects for such a large integrated curriculum with a very strong K-12 director led program. His experience in technology obviously serves us well in this particular moment in time. He evidently has a very strong commitment to the arts programs. I heard that a lot when speaking to various stakeholders in Plymouth. And the other thing I will say is that one of the things I enjoy about being on these screening committees, I think this is my third or fourth, is that it's a chance for me to hear some new ideas of things that are going on in other districts. And I did write down several ideas that came out of that conversation with Gary. I loved his Super Teach initiative, where when he comes in to do an observation, he actually has the students kind of teach back some of what they've learned. I again thought his video for convocation was a terrific way to get a sense of the types of communication strategies that he has. And so again, in terms of that sort of fit, and again, the fact that he has that building project experience, I think is really incredibly valuable in this moment as well. I did think Kris Nash was an incredibly experienced person. She checked all the boxes in terms of the fact that she was an experienced interim superintendent, which brings value. She also, again, has that MSBA experience, which is terrific. And one thing I will say, I do think both Kris Nash and Andrew Keogh were very honest about kind of the limitations of what we can expect from an interim.
Yep.
We are asking a lot, and I think they gave some very specific answers about those challenges around our 9% budget increase, around the building projects and so on, that I thought showed some maturity and showed kind of a real knowledge of what they'd be walking into. So again, I thought both of them gave some very good specificity to their answers, and I'm sure John Ferris in particular appreciated some of the specificity that
She's back.
from.
Yes.
Yep.
Sorry, you're.
We'll say about Dr. Keogh coming from.
You're sorry, Carrie. I mean, sorry, Katie. You're cutting out a little bit, a lot.
Dr.
now.
Keogh's. Okay, on that last bit.
Yep. On Dr. Keogh, we kind of missed what you said about Dr.
Okay,
Keogh.
yeah. So what I would say about Dr. Keogh is that he probably is coming from the most similar experience to what we have experienced in Hingham this year, in that I do think Dover, Sherborne had a very similar experience during COVID. So whether that's a strength or not, again, I think he's coming in probably with the most similar experience of this past year to what we experienced here in Hingham. So again, I think we have three really strong candidates, and thankful for the fact that we do have three really good choices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in terms of speaking with other teachers, I felt that there was more support for Gary than for the other two, because I did speak with teachers who had worked under both Andrew Keogh and Christine Nash, and heard more positives about Gary than about the other two from a teacher's perspective. So.
Yeah, I had the same. I have some colleagues, well, friends actually, in Hanover, and they didn't have any perspective on Gary, but on Nash they did. And it wasn't very positive. I didn't get definite details, but there wasn't a good vibe, should I say.
Of all the candidates, she certainly talked the talk about supporting teachers more than the other two.
Yeah.
Interesting, the free LA isn't matching.
Yeah, I didn't get a lot of details, but.
It is interesting because especially her plan on the building, like bringing in the teachers because they have to live it. I really thought she was very teacher focused. She wanted to bring in the teachers and get their feedback before kind of launching in. So that it's interesting that doesn't jive with what you've heard.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
She did talk about cutting teachers every year.
Yeah.
Yes.
Liza?
That was one.
So
Right.
I agree with practically everything what people said. I'm not going to go into negatives. I felt that Gary and Andrew were a little more focused on communication plans, and also both of them, when we brought up the override issue, were like, communicate, get the override, like, do it. And I didn't hear that from Kristen. She was more reserved, like, oh, well, if you don't get it, then just cut the budget. And so we want that energy going in and being positive. So, I felt like Gary and Andrew brought a lot of the similar skills, but had very different personalities. And so what do we want for next year of being positive and up? So I like Gary. The other thing I liked about him is he saw his role as the interim of helping us find the next superintendent, and that he would look like and knowing Hingham then would help us, bring in the right person behind him, and I liked that about him. My one concern, and then this would be something the school committee has to really focus on, is that we do know Gary has this other commitment to Houston. And so are we going to have him 100% focused on Hingham? And if we don't have him 100%, what percent do we have him? And then what can we realistically get accomplished with him when he's not 100% focused on us? I think we could work that out, but I think we all need to be very clear about that, and we have to understand what we're expecting of him and what his realistic responsibilities are for that. And so I would like some more clarification on that to really understand where we're going. And I did think that I agree with Katie that I think Andy Keough does come from a community that's much more similar to Hingham. I didn't hear that from Kristen. And there were some things that she was talking about that I feel like Hingham is beyond. Like, she is still catching up to where we are. Like technology supports for the teachers. We gave everybody the laptop, made sure everybody had that at the beginning of last year. They're just doing that this year. So, little things like that I think we need to really think through of where we're going. So those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just looking back at my notes, and the one thing that I had written, I mean, again, so grateful that we have 3 really good candidates. I mean, I really, honestly, we cannot go wrong. But I had written for Gary, and I really liked him. I loved the videos. My kids were singers, so I was like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. I thought kind of like, man, maybe I should have gone to Plymouth, because there's some talent down there. But I had written down, has a lot going on. Like, is it going to be too much? But so to Liza's point, I think we'd have to figure that out. I liked it. My takeaway from him was, one of the things he'd said was, like, and I felt it, like, he knew the difference between being a leader, a colleague, and a friend. Yes. And that's hard to do sometimes when you're a leader. And I thought that was really interesting, that he recognized that about himself and that he could make those differentiators. Andrew, I really warmed up to him as the interview went on and on. I thought he had some really great answers. His Metco answer, really, I thought was amazing. I thought he had some great things. I loved his line about, if you aren't outraged when your core values are violated, then they're not a core value. I was like, amen, brother. That is amazing. Amazing. And then Dr. Nash, I think what really resonated for me was that she does have a point with that. It's not my first rodeo. I've done the interim role before, and she really got that nuance. That I actually liked the fact that she said it's not a caregiving role. It is you got to keep moving that ball down the field. So, so I'm I'm a little torn. But yeah, but I mean, really great candidate. So, but I'm hearing your feedback from the staff. I think that it's interesting because the school committee does have the priorities of the budget, the buildings, but all of those things, when we keep reminding ourselves this, it's like, but that all has to do with the students. Right. And so how does that benefit the students? That was sort of Carrie and I have sort of joked about it. That's our mantra this year. If we're talking for more than 5 minutes and the word student has not come into the conversation, then we should be talking about something else, right? So anyway, that's my feedback.
I had a lot of the same things written down that you had, Michelle, on Gary. Has a lot going on, so that was one of the things that I was really worried about, because Hingham has a lot going on. We have a lot going on. We have the budget issues, we've got the building, we've got the strategic plan, we've got to heal this community. So we have a lot going on, and my worry is that if he's got some other things and he's focused on other things, he's not going to really have the time. And then I saw the videos, and my kids know when I'm not in a great mood to play the Greatest Showman songs, and that was one of the songs. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I love him. And my kids are performers as well, so that really resonated with me. And then as the days progressed, we went to Andrew, and I could feel his passion. He had really good eye contact. He really thought about his answers. There was something he has the teachers' backs. I have this highlighted, which I thought was really important, because I think that we have to have a superintendent that will say, these are the initiatives that we're going to focus on. These are our priorities. And when the people in the trenches go to do that, that superintendent has to have their backs with the community, because the community is tough, and they have to be able to say, these are what we're going to work on, and in a thoughtful way, to be able to say to the community, nope, this is what we're doing, this is what we've agreed on, and not have that person sway to what each community member is saying or doing, because there are strong opinions out there. We often hear from the it's the minority, the very vocal minority that we hear from, and that's unfortunate, because I think there are others that have the more reasonable tone. We're not hearing from them, but we know that's probably 90% of the community feel the way that that what we're doing is the right thing. So I thought that was important, that he's got the teachers' backs. The other thing, it's interesting. Along that lines, he said the public shows lack of discretion sometimes when they're speaking, which I think happened a lot this year. So it's important to have that appreciation. I completely agree on his view of METGO. I heard diversity, equity, and inclusion from him a lot, which I think is very important. And then I wrote down he's very honest. Talking about circling the wagons when it came to the budget. He appreciates, what he needs to do in order to get that done. So I had written that down as well. Good at calming the waters, and I did feel like he had a very calming presence. And then another thing that I highlighted is, he's past the point of worrying about making decisions. Thought that somebody just has to make a decision, and that decision has to be where we go, and there can't be any, everybody comes to the table, but there's got to be one person who's making that decision. So that really resonated with me as well. So then we get to Kris Nash. I really liked how engaging she was. Her two buzzwords that she said, equity and excellence, and I feel like she brought in the teachers. At least what I heard is that she's bringing in the teachers all the time, getting their feedback. She puts the students first. It's not about equality, it's about what each individual student needs, and looking at what those barriers are, so I think that's important. I liked how often she was meeting with people, the fact that she was meeting with even the union president on a weekly basis, I think is really important. What else? I really, her response to the budget, it resonated because she was very honest about it. The fact that we are going to be, that we've got a predicament. We don't want to have to lay off any teachers. We want to be able to get the support for the override. So I need to go back and kind of rethink how she termed all of that, because I do think the people who say, we got to go get them and be positive about it are the people that we want, but you've also got to be realistic too. I thought she was passionate. She really got clarity about the questions before she answered them. And she's done this work. So those are my thoughts in a nutshell.
Well, may I?
Oh, yep. Go ahead, Carlos.
Okay. If I had to rank, I would rank Gary, Kris, and Andrew. One thing I like about Gary, well, I like everything about the guy. I really think that he's very down to earth and he's ready to help us in any way, shape, or form. The fact that he has a lot of experience in actually developed a climate change, technology, plan where climate actually is leading the way. They're generating more power than they need. They're actually getting money back. Climate change, as you all know, we voted last year in town meeting, and we are going to be working this year very hard to come up with a plan, and he could help us with that. His experience on MSBA is a plus. So he knows McCarthy personally, and I think that is a key in making sure that we continue the great relationship that our team already built. Curriculum-wise, he's been teaching. He has been a assistant principal, and so on and so forth. There is that saying that goes, if you wanted to get something done, you ask the busiest person in the room. So I'm not really afraid of his other commitments. I wanted to make sure that he is committed to Hingham and to everything that we need to do within the next year, and so perhaps even beyond that. But I'm not really concerned about if he had other activities, because most professionals are involved in different things at the same time. As long as he can juggle them at the same time, that would I wouldn't mind. So I for the reasons I would side with him. I did like Kris, the fact that she definitely gets buy-in from the union president, and have her communicate with the teachers things that she's planning in implementing. She's touching the word trust, and I think that's one of the things that we need to continue building is trust amongst our staff and central office and the school committee. So together we can provide the service that our students need. I will leave at that. I didn't feel that Andy had the passion, and so for that reason I'm ranking him to it. Thank you.
Jen's gonna go.
Okay. I guess I'll go in order of how we heard them. I thought Gary was a great leader. He had a tremendous amount of energy. I think he would be very motivational towards teachers, staff, everyone. The time concern is definitely a concern that I have, and definitely we would probably want to look into that just a little bit more. In terms of Andy, I have written down his comments about his core values that impressed me. He sets the tone. I really liked his MECO answer that Nez brought up. I feel like it would be a good, stabilization and calming the waters. But to Carlos's point, I didn't see that passion that I saw from the other two. And then Kristen, Dr. Nash, I really liked her. I keep coming back to what do we need right now, this year, going forward for the next year? What do our students need? What is the best fit? These are all great candidates. I think they would all be great here, but I'm just looking at the whole picture and what do our students need? And in my opinion, I think she will bring that. I liked her answer about the budget. Like Nez says, it was very honest. But I felt that she would have that momentum to go forward with that. I didn't see a hesitation with it. She was honest, but she understood it. Her experience of interim, I think, is a good point. I mean, she talked about her 3 stages, building that stability and trust, focus, the strategic plan, and then that transition. She was the only one who mentioned that transition plan for the next superintendent, which I think is important to where we are at as a school district right now. And I feel like that ongoing communication and the leadership with the staff would be the best thing for our students. I think all comes down to our students. So, but again, all 3 amazing, strong candidates.
It's a good position to be in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Good problems.
Yep, sorry.
Katie has her hand up.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Katie?
Yeah, I just wanted to provide a little bit of perspective on the comment that Carlos made earlier, in that, you know, a really top-notch professional usually does have other irons on the fire that then inform their own practice. And so, for example, most superintendents also teach a graduate level class. Most superintendents also assume leadership roles with the mass associations of superintendents and so on. So having those outside professional commitments is more common than not of very experienced superintendents who are, you know, sharing their experience in other ways. And so again, I don't necessarily see that as a downside, where someone has the you know, experience such that they would be sought out for a consulting position or so on. I think actually you know, and certainly the time commitment is a very much of concern, but I do think we need to be really mindful of the fact that this leader is not going to carry the burden exclusively. They will be a leader of leaders. So in terms of looking at that, you know, that aspect of it, don't forget the fact that that person is rallying the troops rather than solely carrying the burden on their own.
You know, that's a fair point, and I was just thinking too that unfortunately we saw what happens when you live, eat, and breathe Hingham Public Schools all day long, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for however many hours Dr. Austin was here, right? Because we see what that does to someone. So it's a fair point, right? Sometimes having the outside perspectives and ways to get out of your own head and out of the bubble that you're in can be a positive. So, thank you.
I actually saw that as a positive because it's an educational consulting business.
Yep.
And as we go and search for a permanent superintendent, he's very connected in the community, and so that might be really helpful for us.
Yep. All right.
Agreed.
Thank you. Tim?
Sure. I think I have a very similar perspective to a lot of the people talking. I think Gary had a great energy. I think he was a very unifying personality, I think, is sort of what we need. I think that would be great going forward to it. I think the building experience is great, although I liked Dr. Nash's answer with the school design building much better. I care much more about the education happening in the building than how they get their power. So I think that was very impressive with her. I was not expecting to be impressed by her, and she blew my hair back. I thought she was wonderful. And I think the experience of, you know, being an interim, dealing with the transitions, I thought her answer about the budget was really powerful. I think it's uncomfortable to hear about teachers being laid off, but those are the stakes. Like, if we don't get the override, people will be laid off, and I think that's element of realism and sort of keeping the stakes in mind. I thought Andrew was great too. I think all of us can sort of keep that sentence in our head about if we're not outraged when our core values are violated, they're not core values. I think no matter who we pick, I think we should keep that as part of our collective personality as we move forward. I thought he was a little soporific. The energy that he was bringing was very calming. I'm not sure that's necessarily what we need. I think, yeah, I mean, I'm sort of in between Dr. Nash and Gary. I'm blanking on his last name right now. Yes. Thank you. I'm sorry. But I think any of the three would be great candidates, but those sort of, I'm divided between those two for specific reasons with each of them. And I'm not concerned about, sort of going back to what Katie was talking about.
John, you want to go?
Yeah, sure. I'll be happy to go. I think all three candidates were very, very good. From my perspective, when I was, listening to Andy and stuff, I mean, Andy came out and he answered the questions, and he answered them truthfully, because whoever steps into this role has got a big issue, a big job ahead of them, because there's a lot of issues that are out there. I particularly go back to, the answer relative to the MSBA and the budget and stuff, where it's like, okay, you want me to do that? Which was I mean, anybody in their right mind would probably be thinking that. It's one thing to think it, and then there's another thing to say it. Gary and Christine, I mean, I think that they were both excellent candidates as well. I think either one can sort of, carry the ship. I loved, because they talked about that element that's really necessary for this role, and that is building that trust. I mean, Andy came out and he said, sometimes it takes 3 to 5 years to build trust. I mean, these are real issues, folks, right? Everybody, this person needs to be able to build trust or hit that ground running, or have that presence about them where they can sort of assume the trust, and people say, wow, they make sense. They talk well. They understand what the issues are. I can get behind them for whatever period of time they may need to, so that we can get ourselves moving again. I think that I think that trust. I mean, it came across with Kristen, and it's also came across with Gary. He said you got to build a trust. What did Gary called it? The speed of trust. The speed of trust, and Kristen alluded to it as well. I like both of those candidates. I particularly loved Kristen. I liked her answers. I mean, I thought from an educational perspective, as she laid out all of those issues that she's dealt with, I mean, I understood them all, which I think is really good when I understand stuff, because I understand numbers. And I love when I understand what an educator is telling me about, so that I can understand what people are dealing with within the field. And then from the budgetary perspective and the MSBA perspective, I mean, I love that she went right to that educational profile and what does our school have to do for the future. So in that sense, I mean, I think my top two would be Kristen and Gary. And for those reasons, really, it's like, I think, from a working relationship, I think all of them I could work with, but, I think those two I could particularly, hey, we'll get along fine, we'll be able to figure out what's, going forward. I mean, I want to alleviate, concern about, teachers getting laid off and stuff. She just doesn't know what our budget process is. She doesn't know how we go about in a thoughtful way our budget process. So, while other districts may be, lots of districts are laying people off every year and then sort of hiring them back. I mean, that's not Hingham's practice. That's not our way. I hope that we don't get there. And I believe in the process that we go through. So I wouldn't put too much credence on that element. And the other thing too is, I mean, you could talk around, no one's going to enjoy 100% popularity, right? there's going to be people like somebody, people don't like somebody, people, well, they really did this. And, you know, and sometimes people hold that against you forever, and sometimes like, wow, was I really that concerned about it? So, you know, I don't tend to, you know, I don't put too much credence on anything I hear from anybody else. I basically look at a candidate and I say, are they telling me the truth right now? Because I'm, you know, I'm assessing that person that's with inside too, and I believe all of these people have a true love of kids, and long-term educators, and they're there, and you know, God bless them and thank you. So, you know, I mean, you know, so I mean.
I changed my mind. This sounds like a lot of work. Did I mention I was retired?
Right. Yeah, you know.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Right, and I mean, Andrew said something similar, right? So, you want me to do that? What, you know, so, I mean, but, you know, they, if there are any of them listening, know that there is a process in place, and all of this will be okay.
Yes.
We need a good leader.
Right, yes, right. I was thinking we might have included in Liza's question, there was unanimous vote for the 9% budget increase, even knowing that the fiscal cliff was coming. So we did leave that out. But
One thing, sort of going off what Wendy was saying about the Kris's ability to have a teacher's perspective, I did ask her about curriculum and how that's changing. She didn't talk about curriculum. She talked about pacing the entire time, which is a very superintendent-y view of what teachers do. Like, I don't care what you do, but just do it according to the time schedule that we have. So that I didn't think was a great answer.
One thing I did not like about Kris is she did not really answer Carrie's question about the controversy. She went around just citing,
I think, I know, I always think those are tough because I think everyone always, and Mary and I talked about this in our interviews yesterday, people always go to a personnel issue and then they wait, I can't talk about that because it's a personnel issue. So they're like, I better walk that one back.
So yeah, that is the problem.
Yeah, that's because that's what pops into your head, of course, right? Yeah.
Right. This is going to be shocking to everybody, but I'm not going to talk for very long because I love everything that you all said. John, I'm very happy when I can understand all the things that you do. So
Perfect.
You know, feel back the other way. It's great. You always help me so much with all the budget things. I like Katie's comment about leader of leaders. I think that that's very important. Jamie and I have been talking lately, and I keep saying everything's going to be fine. He keeps saying everything's going to be fine. We have to remember that 99.9% of the people are still here, still staying, still the same people, you know, and still very willing to work hard and keep things going. We are an excellent school system. I'm starting my 43rd year. I'm going to tear up, and I know we're going to be fine. So I will say that I would happily work with all three of them. And I think we're very fortunate that, you know, all three of them were here. I think they were all incredibly honest. I saw what a lot of you saw. I saw passionate educators who care about children, who care about equity, who care about excellence, and I think those are the important things. But I will go in order of what I think, and I think right now, with all we've been through, and I'm going to go to Dr. Keogh's point about dinner conversation has become community conversation. And social media, unfortunately, people believe it. And I always say to my community, please call me. You know, if you see something on social media and you don't think it's true, I say, please call me. And he had a really good point about that. So that being said, I think right now, in general, in this country, maybe in the world, we need healing. And so I feel that the healer that we met this week was Gary. I feel like he was inspirational. He was a unifier. The one quote I wrote down was, I love people and making things happen to affect lives of kids. And I also liked the point about, he talked constantly about helping for the next superintendent. I know all three of them are, fine with that, but he talked about it a lot. And I could almost see him, you know, affecting a wonderful transition to the next person. So, you know, everything else you've all said about him, I completely agree 100%. I was blown away by Kristen this morning, not expecting to be honest. I don't know why, but she's just so brilliant. and very, very impressive. And to other people's points, she's been an interim and done a very good job. And I wonder if you all noticed that she loves every single system she was in. I mean, she would talk about Oxford, she would talk about Freetown, she would talk about Hanover, and I thought that was phenomenal too. And I also thought Andrew was a wonderful person and educator, definitely very calm. He mentioned that we all have PTSD, and I would completely agree with that. Whether, I don't know, I think I've resorted to chocolate chip cookies. That's what's helped me with my PTSD, but which isn't good. But I think it's true of everybody, that we all have a little trauma, definitely, if not a lot of trauma. We have to be real about that. One of the things I talked about last year was, to kind of get our community to understand what we were facing. As I talked about, imagine what it was like living in London during the bombing of Britain. And, I think that we have gone through a similar time. I mean, I don't want to take anything away from what happened in World War II, which was horrific. But, when I think about those people, and I have parents who remember that because they lived in the British Isles at that time. And when I think about what those people went through, we are going to look back on this and realize it. So he talked a lot about that, and I think the calming effect, he's a listener, and the core value sentence I also said. And all three of them I thought were very much for equity and understood about the METCO program. But I would say, like I said, I could work for all three, and it's very close, but I would say that right now we really need the healer, and I feel that Gary is that person. But I think Kristen's phenomenal, I think Andrew's phenomenal, so I'll work with all three of them.
Can I ask a follow-up question? So and I appreciate the healer. I worry about somebody that is wanting to make peace with everyone, but not able to say to certain people, no, you got to stop. You got to back off. Like we just had so much of that. I think with social media, as you mentioned, there is just so much false information being put out there. And if there's a healer that's in there, is that person going to be able to say, you got to stop. You got to knock it off. This is not helpful.
That's a great point. I think any one of them will be able to, because I'm thrilled that you decided to go with interim for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all three of them could do that. But that's a well thought out question.
Yeah.
I think. What does everyone else think?
I think he did have situations, like for instance with the kids who were abroad, where he had to.
Oh, the Italian trip?
Right. With the Italian trip. I mean, I think he did face conflict, and I think,
say, this is what we're doing.
And deal with unhappy people and communicate, and, I mean, I felt like he gave the best example of dealing with controversy and challenge.
I did get positive feedback on his ability to push back on folks in the Plymouth community. It's not an easy community, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of different stakeholders and much bigger. I did hear some positive feedback, and I forgot about how could I have forgotten? I think I wanted to put it out of my mind that Italy, as he was saying it, as he was telling the story, I was like,
I know.
Oh, I'm having,
Yeah.
oh, it was
I know.
Me too.
just,
Right.
oh, what an
I know.
awful
Me too.
story.
Just,
So,
yeah.
Katie, you were going to?
Oh, yes, so similar to you, Michelle. Curriculum directors were all part of kind of an area network of fellow directors, and Gary's name was brought up as someone who absolutely has the back of his administrators and teachers. And my understanding is his strategy towards potential conflict is getting ahead of it. So he's a very proactive communicator and kind of gets ahead of it. But the administrators, teachers, and so on that I've interacted with absolutely felt that he had their back, but also just had such a nice way about him that, again, when conflict came to bear, which is going to happen, there's a lot of fraught times, still ahead, that he did very much, has high praise from all of the stakeholders in town, that he was able to calm waters and additional challenges. And again, the buzz amongst administrators is that he is very much someone who does have the back of administrators and teachers.
Liza, I see your hand is up.
I have to go.
Yeah.
And I have to go to a wedding. So
Oh.
I wanted to add that I agree with everything everyone said, and I'm all for going with Gary. There's one thing Kristen said is in the role of the interim, one of the first stages is having a familiar face and someone that we feel good about and we're confident in. And hearing the feedback from the staff today of their research with the teachers, that's clear about Gary, that we have that. And that also, thinking back on this, he probably knows us the best because of the work he did on the accreditation study.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
he's on the South Shore.
And
I feel like people here could have that confidence in him because he's a known factor.
Right.
Yeah.
Also, I think as we've heard from all these candidates, and as Katie said, we can draw all the great things we heard from each one and inform the person we picked. These are the things we would like you to do. So I think that's also really important. And I think if Susan Diamato and Kerry can get us more clarity on what Gary's role is, as superintendents do teach courses and other things, the school committee and the community understands what that time commitment is. Mm-hmm. So we're just, if we can get that detail for us on Monday, that would be really helpful for me. But I'm all for what Carlos said. Busiest person in the room gets the most work done. I can relate to that. People ask me to do that. It's a lot.
Me too.
So those are just my closing thoughts, but I have to get on the road.
Go.
And thank you everyone for all your time and energy on this. I really appreciate it. Going through these searches, you learn so much, and
You do.
it's great to have everyone's thoughts. So happy weekend, everyone.
Bye, Liza.
Happy
Wedding.
Happy
Thank
wedding.
you.
All right, I will recognize our Madam Chair, who we have not heard from yet, really.
I don't have a ton to add. I agree with everything everyone said. I was really impressed with Gary. Just his demeanor, his answers were really good. I think he has a lot of experience. Like I said, somebody who's been in that role, he was superintendent of Plymouth for 12 years. There's going to be some kind of controversy, something out there where people are going to love you or hate you. I couldn't find anything negative about him, and that's kind of amazing. Yeah. I thought Andrew was great. I liked his the core values saying at the end, and he brought that to us. Like that wasn't part of our questions. I was kind of impressed at that. And he seemed to have he had honest answers, as John mentioned too. And then Christine, I was also blown away by her interview today. I thought she answered very specifically and very honestly for all the questions. I liked her answers about backing the teachers and staff. I think that's important. But I think that's why it's also important to ask questions in the community and the people that have worked with her, because people can give great interviews, but it's you have to look at the evidence behind. Are they following through? And not to say that she's not, because I've heard very positive things about her too, but I think we need to, definitely the interviews are extremely important, but also our individual research is too. But I think we would be in great shape with any of them. I think the school committee would be able to work well with any of the candidates. So I'm just, that's my thoughts on it.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. That's.
All right. Well, with all of that being said, if there's nothing else, I just want to thank everyone for your time and energy on this in the middle of the summer. It's been a pleasure working with you on this, and hopefully we can vote on to offer somebody a contract on Monday. The school committee will take the weekend to think about it, and we'll talk about it a little more on Monday. And I will, to Liza's point, get some more clarification from Gary about his schedule as well. And we can move forward, and I'll bring that to the meeting on Monday night or drop it in the packet before then.
All right, thank you. Hey, Carrie, I do have a question for you, and I hope it's not an inappropriate question, but I don't think it is. But I was thinking about this yesterday, and just something to think about. Can an interim only be for 1 year, or could you have a longer term interim? And
I think we advertised the position for 1 year, so I think, but we could probably renew, I'm thinking, if.
Okay.
if
Well,
we wanted to.
And based on
but
Chris's
it's-
response, she sounded like she was
Yeah,
an
it sounded
intern
like
for
she-
multiple years.
Yes.
She was, but she took an so she was a year in Uxbridge, I think, and then she went to another district for a year, and then she went
And then
back
she
to
went back,
Uxbridge.
yeah.
She wasn't
She did
an
it
intern
consecutive.
for
Yep.
2 or 3 years.
I was just thinking about that from like stability, continuity, just like all the stuff this person's going to have to do this year to not that they wouldn't have but to just get it done and then implement it. You know what I mean? Like,
Or would the person want to stay on beyond the interim?
right. Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's the other.
Yeah.
That was another question too. Can you get out
think
of
they're good.
retirement? Can you come out of retirement?
You can. It's really uncommon. I asked Sarah Spatafor about that yesterday.
Okay. All right.
She said it's very uncommon for people to do. Katie, do you have more information on this? I think she has her hands up.
I would agree with the continuity standpoint. You know, in the midst of all of our building projects, 9% budget, and so on, to then also launch a full-scale superintendent search.
Right.
I just think if it is at all possible, even 2 years would buy us the time to really focus on the immediate term needs. So I would agree if that's possible.
Yeah.
So Carrie, could you add another question to the 3 candidates? If we need them beyond the 1 year, would they be willing to stay?
I think that's something the school committee needs to talk about, and I just feel like we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here with that. Because let's find somebody and get them in place, and then we can talk about it, because we would probably launch a search process in the fall, and so I think by that point we'll start to have a feel for what we need going forward. But I think it's a good question, and we should definitely think about it. But right now, I think it would be good to focus on getting an interim in, and then see what we need from there.
Okay. I think everybody good in the room? I think we're good to be released, Madam Chair.
Okay. Can I I'll take a motion to adjourn from the interim screening committee?
Motion made.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
There has to be someone on the screening committee.
Jen seconded.
Jen said second.
Okay, thanks. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, and then a motion to adjourn for the school committee.
So moved.
Thank you.
A second.
Thank you, Carlos. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.